This is a ribbon burner. This is the size ribbon burner that I make and sell on my website. Here's how you make one. There's really two kind of separate parts to this. There's the plenum or mixing chamber, and there's the refractory. The plenum is 3 by 3 square tubing. This is 1/8 inch wall. I don't use that. I use 3/16 wall. It's heavier, it feels better in my hand, and I think it will resist. If it ever gets hot enough to scale in your forge, it's got to scale a long time before you degrade a 3/16 piece of plate. It's not going to get hot enough to scale, but just saying. So you cut out the body of the mixing chamber like this. You leave the flange, the side flanges untouched. You leave a little bit of a return, say 3/16 of an inch return to the inside, and you leave about 1/4 of an inch of a cross tie on each end. A little more on this side, it doesn't matter. Cut a 3-inch diameter circle and drill 9 1/4 inch diameter holes, and then clip off the sides until it's 2.5 inches wide. I set that aside. I make 2 end plates out of 3/16 material that are 2 5/8 square, and I ease the corners. I cut an opening 10 7/8 by 2 inches. Then I cut the overall piece to 11 5/8. Once that's cut, I take 2 7/8 inch blocks, spacers. I just slide them in on each side of that opening. I take my baffle, I lay it in there, centered over the piece. With that tacked in place, I start thinking about the end caps. Nudge these blocks out of here. Don't need those. Bring the end caps up. Bring them up into nice tight contact with the end of the tube. The right distance off the bottom. Same thing on the other side. Turn it over. Take your 1.5 inch pipe. Make sure you've got a little overlap and tack it in place. So just like that, this thing is assembled. It's not welded, but it's assembled. So now it's just a question of burning a little bit of wire, putting this thing together. I'm going to turn my heat and my wire rate way down, use a short arc, and stack a little bead in there. So the last thing I do is tack on 2 little pieces of 2-inch flat bar, flush with the top, just a couple little tacks, project it 1/2 or 5/8 beyond the sides, and what that creates is a stop so that this plenum, this mixing chamber, doesn't settle too far into your form when you're casting the refractory. I leave 1 inch of the plenum sticking below the little stop. That means it will embed 1 inch into the top part of that refractory. So once you have your plenum fabricated, it's put together and it's welded, and you like the welds, you have reason to think that you're not going to have fuel leaking out through the welds in the corners of this thing, you need to think about forming and casting the refractory with 32 5/16 inch diameter holes in the refractory, spaced out about right. So obviously this doesn't just happen without some foresight and some deliberate action, because what you want to have happen is for the refractory to fill up the form high enough that when the plenum is pressed into the form, the refractory squishes up around the projecting lip, the lip that projects to the inside, to get a 100% bulletproof mechanical connection. Now before I assemble this, I'm going to spray a bond breaker in there. That is some sort of an oily or a surface that the concrete, that the refractory won't be able to get a tight hold of to protect the form, so I can use them over and over. I'm going to use WD-40. You could use spray silicone, you could use PAM cooking spray, you could use concrete, you could use form oil, you could use diesel with some oil mixed in it. You could use shortening, melt some shortening and put on there. I'm going to use WD-40. This refractory is made by Harbison Walker. It's referred to as Mizzou Castable Plus or something, M-I-Z-Z-O-U. It is strong. It's got ceramic fiber in it, sort of as a bit of a acting like stealth fiber in regular concrete to provide some tensile strength to the mix. It's got a high sealing threshold, I think in excess of 3,000 degrees. I'm not sure how far in excess. What I know is that it works beautifully and it's hard and it's great. In general, when you're mixing a cementitious powder and water, I'm thinking of thin set under tile or grout with tile or rockite if you're trying to patch something or level a floor. It's best to add the dry material to the water rather than the water to the dry material, because when you do that you always have some dry corners down in the bottom of your wheelbarrow or your bucket or whatever, whereas if you add the dry to the water, everything's going to be hydrated and you're just gradually thickening what is already, you know, highly viscous. You just lay it carefully on top of the crayons so that it's not washing from side to side until you get enough down in the bottom to sort of stabilize those things. If I loaded it all on one side, it might push them over.
Yeah, that's true. But we'll finish it.
All right. Take your trusty Makita palm sander. And stack some more on there. In fact, I think I'm just going to pour that on. Put a little more on there. Looks about right. And that, boys and girls, is how you cast a ribbon burner. So the thing that will get you in trouble is if you are impatient about stripping this. And so to that end, I recommend that if you have a little bit of material left over, if you don't get your proportions and ratio quite right, or even if you do, mix up a little more. I mean, you got a whole bag left over, right? You got 80 bucks of material sitting there. So mix up a little extra and just dump it out right there, so that tomorrow and the next day you can come in and see just how hard that sample gets. It'll give you an idea of how tough your ribbon burner is and whether or not you want a chance stripping it yet. I recommend you let at least 3 days go by. Let it get hard to where, I mean, that'll take an impact and you got to work at it to break it, and then you know that you can pull these forms apart, strip that bottom off there, you know, pry it off all those crayons without worrying about tearing the thing up.